G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza, and today I'm going to be looking at and reviewing the Body-kun and Body-chan models for artists, or at least that's what they're called officially on the website. These are supposed to be like super highly posable, realistically proportioned, manipulatable figures. And I mean, look, some of these poses and some of the ways they can be positioned and used seems pretty cool, but are they practical? Are they worth the money? And I mean, what's the point of them? Is there anything you get out of these that you can't get anywhere else? I don't actually know, but what I do know is I've seen those ads on Instagram a ridiculous amount of times, and I thought, you know what, I bet you guys have too, and I bet some of you are probably wondering what's the point, just like I have. So I bit the bullet, I got one of each, and I thought I would open them up, show you what they come like, and have a bit of a play, and I guess just share my thoughts and opinions with you. Now, I have in the past, a very long time ago, gotten one of those like cheap wooden mannequin-y looking things for the intent of posing it and using it as a reference, and as most of you who have ever done that know, it's a really bad reference. It's not posable and not manipulatable, and I guess these are supposed to be the answer to that. So I guess we'll start off with the male Body-kun figure. So we have a little booklet. Hey, do I come with a laptop? Where's my little laptop? Oh my god, little things! There is a laptop! I got a gun and an old school cell phone and a tablet and a laptop. And a proper new cell phone. Isn't that cool? And of course, you know, samurai sword, just for good measure. Oh, and look at this. It's a little articulated arm that goes into the back, so you can pose them and you can have them floating and doing a kick thing. I don't know. It doesn't feel like super durable, but there are loads of different points of motion for each joint. Like for example, just the shoulder here, you can see that there's like this ball joint that sort of rolls around. That's really cool. But then there's this separate joint for the actual shoulder. And then at the bottom of the shoulder, there's another joint for the bicep to turn in and stuff. So that's really cool. So that way, essentially, in theory, you can have an arm that's like this, or like this. And that's, I don't know, that seems pretty cool. And you do have to be pretty careful, it seems, as you bend the joints. So for example, in the wrist, it's like a ball joint, but it also has a pivot in it. So you have to find the direction of the pivot before you bend it back. Otherwise, I guess you'll just break it, which we don't want to do. But the fact that everything seems to have like two joint placements, so even just this head, you've got the top of the head, but you also have the bottom of the neck, and that way you can actually position the neck to one side and have the head on the other and get this cool sort of, you know, attitude thing happening. I don't know what you're talking about. There you go. We got the shruggy shoulders, nice and high, tilted head, and there we go. That is quite impressive. As first impressions go, I'm impressed so far. I mean, even look here at the elbows. You'll notice that, again, there are two joints. There's one that feeds into the forearm and one that feeds into the upper arm, the bicep and tricep. Doing that with the abdominal muscles is really cool. You've got the upper sort of diaphragm area for the bottom of the rib cage to rotate, and then you've got the top of the pelvis. I should mention this video isn't sponsored or anything. Probably need to clarify that. I'm just sort of sharing my thoughts, but it does feel a little more delicate than I personally feel comfortable handling. So I'm hoping it's durable enough to sort of handle me, if you know what I mean. I will admit I was a bit of a G.I. Joe Action Man fan back in the day, but I was also a bit of a Barbie fan. I'm man enough to admit that every now and then, Action Man settled down with Barbie and started a family. There were sometimes marital problems, but they got through it with a bit of hard work, as every relationship takes. Now, I can't read the instructions because the box is all in, I'm assuming, Japanese. Yes, I know some of those. They're Japanese. That one looks like a smiley face. But I can see from the instructions that essentially the idea is that you pose them, you take a photo of them so that you end up having a two-dimensional reference. We'll play around with that a bit later. We'll pose some of these, take some photos, and just see how it is to just sort of sketch and play with. I'm gonna say, again, first impressions, that's really cool, and it's got some cool stuff with it, so fair enough. All right, I'm paying attention. Now I'm gonna go through and open up these other boxes, and then come back and have a bit of a look at them with you. Alright, so I've gone through unboxing all of these, and there are a few things I've noticed in the process that I just want to highlight. I am getting as picky as I possibly can just to let you know everything I'm noticing in the experience. For example, the female figure, the Body Chan, is that what it's called? Yeah. The Body Chan figure feels less premium to me than the Body Kun figure. Now, I don't know if they have different processes or if it was just the luck of the draw and this one just was not as well molded as the other one. Little bits of the limbs fell off now and then. That didn't happen with the male figure. The right arm actually just came loose as I was unboxing it. Now, ooh, and there goes the shoulder. Is that broken? Pretend that didn't happen. So the joint in the elbow feels a little weaker than I would like it to. If I'm putting that stuff aside, this is still a very highly posable and very dynamic looking figure. It does feel a little less malleable than the male one and just a little more fragile because it is much smaller. Another thing I realized in the process of unboxing these is actually that the hands are meant to stay on this little stand that comes with the packaging, and they sit in here and you can actually put the hands on the left and right side of the stand. I guess another thing I was very, very slightly disappointed by, not in any major way, but the fact that there is an asymmetry in the hand poses. So we have a couple here on the right hand that we don't have in the left hand. I would have hoped that you'd get one of each. Then we have the chibi figure, which again feels probably even a little more cheaply built than the other two. We've got some spare hands here, and unfortunately this one doesn't have a container to hold them in, and the stand is a little less stable, and actually you can see it has a bit of wobble here. So it's not as premium as these other two figures with their very cool compartmentalized stands, but I guess this is a much more niche figure. So they've been a little bit more budget with the build. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take a photo of each of these characters in a pose each and make them as dynamic, give them as much of a personality as possible through their pose. And then I'm also gonna do a duet pose with the male and female in some sort of action or romance. I don't know, I'll figure it out, but one where they're interacting and we get a bit of physicality and interactivity there. So in total, we'll have 4 photo references that on my phone I'm just gonna use and follow along with I guess, sketch from the 2-dimensional reference of my 3-dimensional figures here. As cool as the initial novelty of opening and posing these figures was, it became apparent pretty quickly that using them with any degree of fussiness was going to be a frustrating process. I approached each pose and figure with a clear idea of what I wanted the pose to be, but in every case there were compromises to the original vision based on the various limitations, whether they be the body parts not having enough flexibility to move where I wanted them to, or things just looking generally awkward and the pose needing reworking. The female figure in particular was really frustrating to work with. This might not be the case if the person using them has smaller and more deft hands than mine, but regardless, several of the hands didn't fit at all, and because the figure is so delicate and finicky, every time I tried to refine a small area of the pose, a bunch of the other areas got knocked out or fell off. Or the props I was so carefully trying to get her to hold kept falling out, and reintroducing them into the pose meant applying enough pressure to the model that everything was displaced and I needed to start again. You can imagine this was frustrating enough, but when I finally got her pose to a place I was almost satisfied with, it took so long to position it in a way that made me feel like I could just say it was finished. For example, her eyeline, hand positions, and arm positions looking really awkward or really natural was the difference by just a few millimeters or less. And as you can imagine, fixing one thing usually led to unfixing another. Oh, and the chibi figure was just awkward and fragile in general. So, I mean, that's all I really care to say about that one. When it came to posing the male and female figures together, I wanted to create a sense of intimacy and comfort and have them studying together. I wasn't looking forward to this given my frustration so far, but slowly and steadily I just worked at it until I came to a place I was okay with, which was particularly tricky given the number of props I used and the fact that I didn't use stands for either of them to lean on, but I got there in the end. And from there, having taken a photo of each of the poses, moved on to creating a sketch for each of them. Alright, so let's take a look at what we've done here. Our first figure pose and illustration. Look, it's a bit tricky. I was pretty rough with my illustrations and sketches, but also as close to the positioning of the figure as possible. Now, I think my illustrations look a bit flatter, and maybe that's something that these could be helpful to sort of help work on making things pop and sort of feel more three-dimensional. But at the same time, there are some just awkward parts of the poses and the limbs and in particular some of the hand and foot positionings that aren't ideal, especially if I try to, as literally as possible, stick to the original photo. As I sort of mentioned in the time lapse, there's a lot of compromise when it comes to getting the pose you want. You can get close to it, but when it really comes to fine-tuning it, things really start to fall apart or get extremely frustrating. However, with that said, I can see a lot of value in, particularly if there are areas of weakness. For example, if you're not good at drawing men or women, using a figure like this to just try and get the proportions right can be really useful. Also, hand poses and how hands and foreshortening of limbs looks on different angles. That I can definitely see as a strength of using this sort of a system. This, however, is completely garbage. I gotta say, the chibi doll, not a fan. It's really badly made compared to the other two. Really not easy to pose. It's just much more like rigid and hard to maneuver. Comes with far less hand poses. The neck is too long, and especially when you're drawing chibi characters, it's all about cuteness and not realism anyway. So I don't really see the point of the chibi figure. It just seems like a bit of a waste of money and more of a novelty thing. It doesn't in any way seem practical. And you can see the positioning and poses of the hands and the character in general ends up with, if you follow it literally, an illustration or sketch that ends up right in the uncanny valley. So let's skip past that. I do think this is where you can actually see the value of these figures sort of come into their own a little bit. Now, mind you, it took a lot of frustration to actually get a pose that I was reasonably happy with, and I had to make some compromises. For example, I wanted her right hand to be holding the laptop, but that hand actually didn't fit on the end of her arm. It kept coming off. There was no way to fix it to her arm. So there will be some hands that don't stick to the limbs, which is not great, especially when I wanted to serve a specific function, which comes again to compromise. You end up needing to compromise the vision you had or the pose you may have wanted to get something close enough to it. However, if you can get something you're reasonably satisfied with, this is where it does sort of become pretty useful. And I think drawing figures that are interacting physically or in close confines can be really tricky, especially when it comes to foreshortening, how comfortable and organic they feel next to or with and beside and on each other. So I really wanted to test this and have two little study buddies laying down and playing around and having a bit of a study session. And it's a pretty simple drawing in the end, but it actually feels pretty comfy. I would have found this more difficult to draw without the reference that I created. And I think that does speak of some of the potential that you can gain from using these figures. So now for my final verdict and a few ending comments. And I'm just gonna go through this in pros and cons, starting off with the cons to just get them out of the way. Like I said, I'm gonna be pretty brutally honest. Some of the build quality in these is less than ideal, and depending on what box you happen to get or how gently they feel like shipping it to you, the parts can really just come apart from each other really quite easily at times, and it can become the most frustrating experience ever. The novelty value when you receive these things is great, but it diminishes very quickly as soon as you actually try and put some of the use of it in practice, and the little tiny limbs keep falling apart, or you get your pose to like 85–90% of the way there, and then in just trying to do that little bit of fine tuning, it all falls apart and you're back working from the start to try and get it as close to your final pose as possible. In the end, I always ended up settling it around 85–90% and just calling it a day, because fine tuning it was just so frustrating and difficult. And another thing that led to more compromises was, let's say I want this figure to be dabbing, as you do, get the pose in a general position, and sometimes you'll hit these loose spots. Depending on how finicky you're willing to be, you may end up in a position where just that last little pose is not gettable because it just is loose and not sitting in place. So this requires more fiddling and finicking about, which requires a little more pressure over the whole figure, which ends up putting your pose out of proportion and out of position, which ends up leading to things falling apart and you feeling really frustrated. So they are the cons. There's a couple, and some of them aren't that wonderful. However, the pros are pretty cool if you're willing to be patient. The first pro is the novelty value. These things are cool, and there is just sometimes something worthwhile in just having these little figures to put on your shelf. I mean, I have to admit, I am a sucker for statues, and these things, if you can get a cool pose, can look really organic and would just look really cool on a shelf in general. So I think there's just something nice about them as an item to display. When it comes to actual practical use, I don't see people using these regularly. Now, I may be wrong. I'm sure there are people watching this video who have these, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. Please share them in the comments down below. If you have them, tell us how regularly you use them, because my impression is, even if the mechanisms, the foreshortening and the hand poses and the general workflow of using these was useful to me, I can't picture myself breaking them out any more than once every month or so, if that. It just feels like a lot of work to disrupt the pose that you carefully made and then try and figure out if you can make what you hope to make as a pose into a usable pose. With that being said, like we have here, sometimes you can end up with something a little organic and a little cool, and I think where it will be most useful for people is, once again, for people interested in learning how to draw hand poses on different angles. For example, if you want to do the finger gun and you want to know what it looks like from behind or on top, you can take your photo reference on any angle. I mean, normally I would actually just do that with my own hand, or just take a photo of my own hand, or even Google the hand pose. But hey, look, the more learning resources you have at your disposal, the better, right? And then of course there are people who just don't feel confident when it comes to foreshortening and pose dynamics. There is some use in just learning through that way of building something, taking the photo and just putting it into practice. And I actually think taking a photo of a single pose that looks really cool on different angles and sort of sketching it and practicing your ability to interpret physical space from 3 dimensions into 2 dimensions could definitely be a really worthwhile activity of developing your drawing skills. Plenty of cons to keep in mind, but some of the pros would definitely be useful for those of you who are interested in just having a bit of a crutch and a bit of a way of leaning on something, or focusing on an external development tool to help you pass some of the things that you're struggling with artistically. I hope this little video peek of the Bodycoon and Body Chan figures have been useful or interesting or insightful to you. If you have them, let us know in the comments what your experience of using them has been, how often you use them, if you found them useful or just a bit of a gimmick. Otherwise, if you like this video, please make sure to hit that like button so other people can see this video, and subscribe to Draw with Jazza for more fun with art, creativity, and occasional quirky products. Thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen, and until next time, I'll see you later.
Make sure to subscribe to my channel to see more of my videos. And while you're at it, check out my shop where I sell ebooks, brushes, photo references, video courses, and more. There's another video you might enjoy from my channel over there, and you can also check out my behind the scenes daily vlog channel, Daily Jazza. That's it for now, and until next time, I'll see you later.